want to read a poem, which I sent this to musician Ben Boone, and he wants to know what it was about. Yeah, you get asked that question hundreds of times. It's about the words that are in it. I don't ask him about his melodies, I just accept them for what they are, or don't like them. The rivers are Spanish. An American poet named Robert Francis, who you may never have heard of, when he died, he was older than I am now. About 130. He wrote a magnificent poem, which was a kind of hymn to American rivers. So that was taken. So I thought I would put in Spanish rivers. My wife and my kids and I all together, we all lived in Spain for a couple of years. We went to Franco's Spain to escape Reagan's California. There was no difference in the rulers. I mean, of course, there were profound difference. It's called By the Waters of the Llobregat. The Llobregat is the word itself is Catalan, and it's a river that enters the sea, maybe 10, 15 miles south of Barcelona, where we were living. By the waters of the Llobregat. 2 women and a small girl, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, resting in the shade of the fir trees. From far off, the roar of the world coming back one more time. First, a few words tossed back and forth between awakening men and then the machines, talking to themselves in a language they share with the heavenly bodies, planets, dust motes, distant solar systems that know what needs to be done and do it. So long ago, you think, those days, so unlike these, blessed by favorable winds and forgotten in the anthems we hummed on the long walk home from work, or the childish fables we tried to believe. No one notices the small girl and her caretakers are gone, and no one huddles in the shade of the fir trees. The air, brilliant and calm, stays to witness. The single cloud lost between heaven and here stays. The mountains look down and keep their distance. Somewhere far off, the sea goes on working for itself. By the waters of the Llobregat, no one sits down to weep for the children of the world. By the Ebro, the Tagus, the Guadalquivir, by the waters of the world, no one sits down and weeps. The past is no more past than the future. Or so said Meridian, the unlikely seer of my senior shop class. I'll call him John. Although he was never a John or even a Juan or a Jack. Although his surname, Meridian, ended with I-A-N, which is Ian in Cornwall, the Celtic version of John. Our John Meridian, gone 67 years ago from our schoolboy class into the wider world of war, where his one-way ticket got punched just the once. I would start this again if I could. Start quietly with a Dougie or an Alan, both of whom made it into their 30s, though neither ever spoke of the past being anything but over with. What they actually thought, I'll never know. One spring day, the whole class went by bus to the foundry at Fort Rouge to see earth melted and poured like syrup into fire. Look up, someone said. Maybe Dougie or Alan. So I did and saw way up above the collisions of metal and men a family of sparrows in the trapped light, trapped themselves, or perhaps out to reclaim their stolen space. Speaking of perhaps I'm dawdling because I haven't seen John or Alan or Dougie in over 50 years. Perhaps I just like repeating their names as though that could help them, or perhaps help me. And it does. It helps me. They're beyond my help. Later, the class picnicked on egg salad beside a wide stream that fed our filthy river. Alan, or maybe it was Dougie, managed to cross the water leaping from rock to rock and then back again. His balance was that good. Alan, or maybe Dougie, whoever had crossed, dared me to cross. But I knew enough not to try. I remember the sky darkening in the east, the bus arriving with the rain, the windows steaming up to hide the flooded streets. I remember I sat next to Alan, who lied a blue streak about an older girl who owned her own car. The bus driver lost the way and had to stop at a filling station in Del Rey to get directions. So the trip was endless. I got back before nightfall, but the day kept going, on and on, into the present. The car stops, not because the driver decided they'd gone far enough, or because the woman said I'm sick, or the boy had to pee. It simply stopped because it had to. And when the three got out, and he pops the hood, they discover the fan belt has vanished, and the engine shut down wisely. It could be worse. It could always be worse. A cylinder could seize for no foreseeable reason and send them into irreversible debt. Cars are, after all, only machines. And this one, a 48 Pontiac 6, is aged and whimsical. It could be much worse. The Mojave in mid-July with no shade in sight. Or northern Ontario in winter, the snow already burning the backs of fathers' hands and freighting mothers' lashes. They've stalled descending into a gully in rural Pennsylvania. A quiet place of maples leafing out. A place with its own creek, high in its banks, and beyond the creek a filling station. Its lights still on after dawn. The red and green pumps ready to give, and someone there, half awake. So Fresno, with your filthy air and delicious river, forgive me. It's called Arrival. If the express should slow and then suddenly stop and sit utterly still for minutes on end, and all talk stop, and no one question the stillness, no voice announce what, if anything, is about to transpire. Odd word that for me, transpire, out of Latin, to go out into breath, or air, or nothing. And only I grow restive, the dozen or so others drowsing or seemingly at peace, while the prophet on crutches at last shuts his Bible in his mouth, so that when I rise to stand, the train lurches forward to regain its momentum, and at last arrives somewhere, a station on no map I know, and I make my way upward through the littered passageways to where the street waits with no one to welcome me. I'll know I'm home. These are all sort of recent poems. I don't really write autobiographical poems because I find, for the most part, my life has been pretty dull. I sit in a room, I try to write poems, I fail. The next day I sit in a room, I try to write poems, I fail. And then I dream up excuses for not sitting there and failing. Then I feel guilty and go back into the room and fail. And then I get a poem. And I'm thrilled. And the minute I write it, there's a knock at the door. And it's either someone like Wallace Stevens or T.S. Eliot coming to congratulate me, or a herd of women. I hear you wrote a great poem. May I embrace you? So it's not as dull as I suggested, especially when Stevens comes, because he offers me a cigar. It's called Moonshine, and it is somewhat autobiographical. The people in it were people I knew. Moonshine. At 19, I wanted to write the epic of the moon. It's rising in the east at dawn. I wanted to capture the faces of the assemblers as they trudged across the snow-lit parking lot behind Detroit Transmission at 8 a.m. after a Friday shift, knowing the weekend was theirs, the first weekend in the world's sorry history without a moment of sunlight. I wanted to catch their voices, their hot damning, their ain't this some shit, their pure poetry. No surprise, the epic never got written. Dawn came, the sun rose, rain pounded what was left of the blackened snow, and I took the bus home. Had a cup of thick barley soup I'd made myself. Slept and rose to spend my day reading Rilke in a stilted translation and wondered what the fuss was all about. As for the night, there was a moon, it came, it did its time, it went. Whether it was paid by the hour or the month, I never knew. In 1949, all the workers were poets, though not a single one suspected it. Eddie Dampke was more eloquent than the melting snow or the corolla of stars blinking above the bus stop. To hear Eddie speak in his tobacco-stained baritone of the perfect tits he'd squeezed, to hear him swear by all the saints, was to revel in the glory of imagined things, to know the beauty of a world that never was. In this book is called The News of the World. It's my most recent, 2009, I think. Not that long ago. I mean, you know, I'm still working. Yeah, 2009. That's only 5 years. Rilke took forever to write his poems, and it took me forever to read them. Some of them are very good. Those mean remarks I made about his poems were really not my attitude. I adore all poems and all poets, except the ones I don't care for. This is called the language problem. Which is what, of course, you deal with if you're writing. You deal with the problem of its intractability, its stubbornness, its refusal to give in to your begging. Come on, language, make this sound better. And the language sits there and says, oh, go ahead, see if you can do it. Willie could do it, why can't you? That was hundreds of years ago. Hasn't there been any progress? And the answer is no. There hasn't. There is no progress in the arts, there's only change and fashion. The language problem. Cuban Spanish, this is a prose poem, by the way. If if you were to look at it, you would see it's a kind of ugly block, which is what prose writers do. You know, they fill up the page and belittle you with all their words. That's why I don't write novels like Philip Roth's. That and the fact I have no talent for it. The language problem. Cuban Spanish is incomprehensible, even to Cubans. If you spit in his face, he'll tell you it's raining, the cab driver said. In Cuban, it means your cigar is from Tampa. Single, desperate, almost 40, my ex-wife told the Cuban doctor she'd give $1 million for a perfect fair pair of breasts. God hates a coward, he said, and directed her to an orthopedic shoe store where everything smelled like iodine. A full-page ad on the back of Nueva Prensa Cubana clearly read, quote, free rum 24 hours a day and more on weekends. Free rum was in italics. When I showed up that evening at the right address, Calle Obispo 28, the little merchant I spoke to said, rum? This is not a distillery. They were flogging Venetian blue umbrellas for $4 American. Mine was made in Taiwan, and when it rained, refused to open. Before sunset, the streets filled with music. In the great plaza of the Revolution, the dark came slowly, filled with the perfume of automobile exhaust and wisteria. I danced with a girl from Santiago de Cuba. Gabriela Mistral Garcia was her name. She was taller than I and wore her black hair in a wiry tango. She was a year from her doctorate in critical theory. After our dance, she grabbed me powerfully by the shoulders, as a comandante in a movie might, leaned down as though to kiss me on the cheek, and whispered in my good ear, I dream of tenure. It was the 50s all over again. Here's another Fresno poem. And this is a rather personal poem. I lived in the same house, geez, I don't know, we bought the house about 1972. It's not all that long, but I've grown accustomed to it. I love it. It's where I wrote my best poems. So then people ask me, in Brooklyn, people say, why do you come back to Fresno? Why do you go back there? And I say, well, I like it. And people in Fresno say, why do you go to Brooklyn? I like it. One of the things is they have nothing in common, in spite of what I said, you know, they have nothing. Brooklyn is a city where you walk. I don't have a car there, so you walk, you meet people. Hi. The difference in the gyms are incredible. People come up to me and say, you know, I saw your poem in the New Yorker, and I was very surprised by the fact that you're writing in trochaic tetrameter. I said, thank you. Yeah, well, how come? Here they come up and they say, you have even smaller muscles than you had last year. You need to get a good protein drink. You know? And stop doing those sit-ups. Yeah. It's a real difference. Called Burial Rites. Even on a rare morning of rain like this morning, with the low sky hoarding its riches except for a few mock tears, the hard ground accepts nothing. 6 years ago, I buried my mother's ashes beside a young lilac that's now taller than I, and stuck the stub of a rose bush into her dirt, where, like everything else not human, it thrives. The small blossoms never unfurl. Whatever they know, they keep to themselves until a morning rain or a night wind tears the petals down to nothing. Even the neighbor cat, who shits daily on the paths and then hides deep in the jungle of the weeds, refuses to purr. It's right to end up beside the woman who bore me, to shovel into the dirt whatever's left and leave only a name for someone who wants it. Think of it. My name, no longer a portion of me, no longer inflated or bruised, no longer stewing in a rich compost of memory or the simpler one of bone, kitty litter, the roots of the eucalyptus I planted back in '73. A tiny me, taking nothing, giving nothing, empty and free at last. Actually, I didn't bring gin tonight, though it would have worked. I found in the last couple days that a little drink at a certain moment, whoops, my Kleenex is falling. That would render me helpless. That a little alcohol in the balloon sort of relaxes that cough. I was sitting up there while Steve was playing and admiring his technique and sipping a certain amount of alcohol. Sipping. I could do it again right now if you'd like to see it. I brought it in a bottle disguised as urine. This book is falling apart, for the simple reason it was never bound. This book is dedicated to Larry Levis and my marvelous friend and student who died far too young. And gin is in here somewhere, and I will find it. And it's inscribed to Larry. And I was going to send it to him. This is sort of a mock-up book. But before I could mail it off, because I'm very, very irresponsible about things like that, I got the real book with a binding and nice hardcover. So Larry got the real book, and I kept this, which someday will be worth $7, $8. Is it signed? All right, Jin, where the hell are you, Jin? Okay. Oh God, this is going to be. Well, I'll do it because you asked for it. There used to be something on the radio. It's because you asked for it. You know, we are going to kill 3 sheep here on on television because you asked for it. You know, that kind of request shows. I never saw them kill the sheep. I turned it off. I made that up. Gin. The first time I drank gin, I thought it must be hair tonic. My brother swiped the bottle from a guy whose father owned a drugstore that sold booze in those ancient, honorable days when we acknowledged the stuff was a drug. 3 of us passed the bottle around, each tasting with disbelief. People paid for this? People had to have it the way we had to have the women we never got near? Actually, they were girls, but never mind. The important fact was their impenetrability. Leo, the third foolish partner, suggested my brother should have swiped Canadian whiskey or brandy. But Eddie defended his choice on the grounds of the expressions gin house and gin lane, both of which indicated the preeminence of gin in the world of drinking, a world we were entering without understanding how difficult exit might be. Maybe the bliss that came with drinking came only after a certain period of apprenticeship. Eddie likened it to the holy men's self-flagellation to experience the fullness of faith. He was very well read for a kid of 14 in the public school. So we dug in and passed the bottle around a second time, and then a third. In the silence, each of us expecting some transformation. You get used to it, Leo said. You don't like it, but you get used to it. I know now that brain cells were dying for no earthly purpose. That 3 boys were becoming increasingly despiritualized, even as they took into themselves these spirits. But I thought then I was at last sharing the world with the movie stars. That before long I would be shaving because I needed to. That hair would sprout across the flat prairie of my chest and plunge even to my groin. That first girls and then women would be drawn to my qualities. Amazingly, later, some of this took place. But first, the bottle had to be emptied. And then the 3 boys had to empty themselves of all they had so painfully taken in. And by means even more painful, as they bowed by turns over the eye of the toilet bowl to discharge their shame. Ahead lay cigarettes, the futility of guaranteed programs of exercise, the elaborate lies of conquest no one believed, forms of sexual torture and rejection undreamed of. Ahead lay our 15th birthdays, acne, deodorants, crabs, salves, butch haircuts, draft registration, the military and political victories of Dwight Eisenhower, who brought us Richard Nixon with wife and dog. Any wonder we tried gin? Thank you.